District, and State Representative Dontavius Jarrells of Ohio's 1st District. Senator Craig holds the position of Assistant Minority Leader and has an extensive background in public service at the state and local levels. Prior to being elected to the Ohio Senate in 2018 and 2022, he served in the Ohio House and on Columbus City Council. Representative Jarrells is the Assistant Minority Leader and is currently in his 2nd term serving Ohio's General Assembly. He is committed to advancing common sense legislation that would make Ohio a place where everyone is seen, heard, and inspired. Tonight, Senator Craig and Representative Jarrells will discuss issues impacting Ohio and answer your questions and concerns. Bexley Public Library will also be providing a program discussing the August 8th special election on Wednesday, July 19th at 7 p.m. Elizabeth Geiser from the League of Women Voters will be our speaker. And now I will turn this town hall meeting over to Senator Craig and Representative Jarrells. Thank you very much for attending this event.
I have the great honor of representing the library in Bexley in the 15th Senate District. I have so in the when I was in the House, and certainly with the Columbus City Council, because so much of the work that we have done with Columbus City Council is regional and should be. I talked to the mayor today. First of all, I want to certainly thank the community for Juneteenth. And those of you that had the opportunity to participate in that historic, very important day for all of us, and honor and privilege of introducing legislation that as the key sponsor to create Juneteenth as a statewide holiday. So it is important. It is important for all of us in terms of our nation's history and its both impact and influence. I want young people to really understand, and all of us, the significance of Juneteenth. So certainly wanted to honor the mayor and the council. I talked with him today, and he may be able to join us sometime at some point. Understand that council and the mayor are meeting in their meeting today. It's been a number of years, probably 3 years since I've been here. During this last General Assembly, I'm just going to speak so that we have an opportunity for Representative Jarrells to speak. I know that we have a time limit for all of us. But just to share with you, since I've been here the last time, some of the things that we've been able to do. Certainly, we talked about Juneteenth. It was a bipartisan piece of legislation with Senator Brenner. The last time I was in Bexley, we talked about the issue with plastic bags. I don't know if many of you remember that, and that struggle with the plastic bags. I supported that when I was in the House, but we already know that issue certainly impacted and was influenced by local control. We continue to look at that issue vehemently because it is critical, certainly for the city of Bexley, but all over the state of Ohio. So local control is an essential piece of Ohio's governmental landscape and must be protected. And I don't say that it's not hyperbole. This whole issue of guns and this proliferation of guns has everything to do with local control. So I've worked with Columbus City Council and others, have introduced a number of bills regarding that issue to try to take some of these guns off of the streets. We've got 12 and 13-year-old young people that have no business with guns at all, or any of us, and the lives that have been lost, tragically lost, through guns. And it's not against the Second Amendment, but we ought to be able to do something to have common sense gun laws that saves our families and our children. Secured $1 million for the Ohio State University African American Extension Center. That building is really now under construction. It's just not a hope and a dream. But we want that center to be a place where young people can learn. My hope is that they'll be able to take college classes there. The community will be able to convene and have discussion, and so that project is underway. Senate Bill 61 is a bipartisan piece of legislation with Senator Manning to cap insulin at $35. In this nation, nobody should not have access to insulin. Found that this last several years that my great-grandson has juvenile diabetes, but any young person. One of the reasons I introduced that bill, I had a mother come to me, and her daughter, who was in college, was rationing insulin, found her daughter dead. And that should never happen in this nation. So we have introduced legislation, and we're going to continue to push that bill. 1.1 million Ohioans have diabetes. 25% of insulin users have reported rationing insulin. Let me try to move on to the next bill, Senate Bill 78, to restore local control of firearms. I continue to introduce that bill. I certainly want to thank Moms Demand Action. They're there in great numbers. And literally, we could not do without them and their advocacy in the State House. The other thing that I want to just point to very quickly, I've already got $750,000 committed to a dental clinic on the east side of Columbus, not far from here. Recently got another $400,000 appropriated in the budget. The truth of the matter is, because of this budget and some of the issues with the budget, I may not support the budget if we're not able to take out some of the draconian things. And we'll talk more about that. But it's a serious budget, and I'm so happy that you all are here. We are going to talk about the budgets and its implications for all of you and our families and our children. But we have got the commitment and have that in the budget. The last thing is August the 8th, and of course we're going to talk about that, and I hope that you will be engaged, and not just, we're not going to be talking heads tonight, and that's my expectation. I want to hear from you what you're thinking. We want to be held accountable. I brought lots of information, again, where you can look at the things that I've advocated, the kinds of legislation that I've both proposed and and was able to pass with your support. But right now, that's August the 8th date. That's the demarcation line for many of us. If we don't vote that bill down with all of the implications, certainly for reproduction, that is key and is important. But there are a number of issues with that issue, with issue 1, that will affect all of us in so many important ways. So I'm going to stop right here and thank all of you for the privilege of being with you. I'm excited about our discussion tonight in this town hall meeting. I've been able to do them all over our city. And I'm hopeful that what will happen tonight will be more engaged, more excited about the work. We've got some real, we're talking with Rick Neal, a good friend. There's some serious times, but I remain to be hopeful. I think these kinds of meetings helps all of us to be further engaged in the work that we need to be doing. Thank you very much for being here this evening.
I think we can do better than that. Let's give another applause to Senator Hearcel Craig. Is this on? All right. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. Let me turn it on. Okay. Give me 1 second, y'all. Uh-oh. I think it is on. It's on now. Well, good evening, everybody. How y'all doing today? Listen, I am truly honored and privileged to be here with all of you. I'm going to give you this mic back. If you don't mind, thank you. My name is Dontavius Jarrells. I happily serve as Assistant Minority Leader and representing House District 1. And so if you live in Bexley, German Village, at the airport, Linden up to 11th, Milo Grogan, King Lincoln, downtown, ooh, I love downtown, Franklinton, Bexley Berwick, I represent you. And it's an honor and true privilege to represent you in the district. And let me tell you, give you some backdrop of who I am. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, born and raised in the Huff neighborhood. If you look up Huff, look at 1969, the Huff riots, I learned very early what poverty looked like. I learned very early the struggles that my family went through. It was not just my mom and my father. It was the community struggles. And I grew up learning that it is a system that dictates conditions that people ultimately can be in. And it's not just individual choices that people make. And so I got really inspired to want to address, issues that impacted my mama. And I worked really hard to want to figure out where do I need to go to begin to address policies at a system level. And so I became an LSC fellow after I graduated from college, which brought me down to Columbus, where I worked for a myriad of different legislators back in 2011. That's a long time ago, y'all. At least it feels like it. And I loved every bit of being in the State House because the work that we do in the State House, as Senator Craig talked about, is the difference between life and death for so many families. I can tell you stories of how our office helped families get their homes back, who were on the chopping block in terms of losing their homes due to an eviction, and we helped stop that from happening. I can tell you during the pandemic, there were families who were in need of food and didn't know where to turn, and our office directed them to the supports that they deserved. I could tell you about families who were struggling to get on Medicaid, and we got them on Medicaid so that their families could get health care access, right? Real, tangible good that's happening out of our offices. And I'm not alone. Senator Craig's doing the same work. And so when we think about the work that's happening in the State House, it truly is miracles happening in real time. And that's what I love about the State House and the work that we do each and every day. And so I'm second term. This is in my first term, I was in House District 25, and I represented a different configuration of Columbus. But I'm proud to represent this community because it's so diverse. When you go to Franklinton and the issues that happen there are much different than the issues that impact Bexley, much different than the issues that impact Linden, and so, or Old Town East, or the South Side, which I also represent. And so the beautiful diversity of culture that exists within my district means that everywhere I go, I'm tackling different issues because the people are dealing with different things. And so, I don't know if my PowerPoint is up. I have a little PowerPoint. Do I need to pull it up? I'll fly through the PowerPoint. Got me? Perfect. You're going to turn me on. So when I first stepped into the office in 2020, it was during COVID. And one of the first things that I wanted to do, I was actually given a kind of a challenge. When I first walked in, I had a member sit me down and say, just learn the ropes. Now, mind you, I've been there before. I know where the bathrooms are. And, and I wanted to make a direct impact. And so this legislator challenged me. He was like, you're not going to pass any laws when you first get in. So just sit down and listen. And I was like, I don't know what I said. Probably said bump that. And y'all know what I really said, though. We're going to do some work. And we were able to introduce 14 bills, 6 of them that went into law. And I'm proud to say that it's 42.8% of my bills are now currently in law impacting Ohioans all across the state. And the first bill is a bill that I worked on with Senator Craig to establish Poindexter as a historical site. Because when we don't want to ever lose the history that has come before us. I stand on the shoulders of so many people. And historically, Poindexter has been a place of pride for families all across this city. And what better way to commemorate that space, that community, than to have a historical marker that reads and talks about the story of Poindexter. And so that was my first bill that I worked alongside Senator Craig to make happen. And so I was like, I went back to that legislator, it's like, see, I can do this. And then the second bill, we talk about removing some of the historical wrongs that have impacted our state and our nation. Who all heard of redlining? Right? So I have a bill, bipartisan, with Representative Gunbari, that was placed in the budget, thankfully, and signed into law, that changed how we looked at restrictive covenants. That's what you would call essentially redlining. When they wrote in, you can't sell it to these individuals. And in Ohio, we never had a statute that strictly outlawed redlining. We always confer to what the federal law says. And so what we did was we created a law that says in Ohio, you can't do redlining. You can't have these restrictive covenants. And we created a process by which when an individual is transferring their deed from one property owner to the other, we're removing that language once and for all. And we're holding attorneys non-exempt when they do that, when they clean those deeds. And so that was my second bill. My third bill was House Bill 281, which looked at changing 33 horrible, visceral language out of our Ohio Revised Code that impacted people with disabilities, people who had mental health issues, and people with addictions. When you have habitual drunkard and the R word that's still in our Ohio Revised Code that judges are, by statute, had to say in court proceedings, what type of stigma are we putting out there in our code? And our code should reflect all of us as people. And so I'm really proud to say that that bill, House Bill 281, was passed into law and signed by the governor this year because it passed in lame duck so that once and for all, our code is reflective of the people that represent this state. And I'll quickly go through, let's see if I got it. Bing, 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 bing. Did it work? You got me? Okay. It's the bottom. It's the down arrow. Okay. Up is down and down is up. Okay. I'll talk about the budget real quick, but I wanted to go through these bills real quick. Created a license plate called the Recovery's Beautiful License Plate, which essentially uplifts recovery. My background is in mental health and addiction policy. I used to work in the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, and so there's an affinity to making sure that our laws truly uplift all of us, even folks who are in the darkest parts of their humanity in the moment, right? And what can we do to make sure that we're providing treatment, recovery, and prevention so that we can actually see people be their best selves in the state? And then last but not least, most of these bills are bipartisan. Being in a minority, it means that we have to work across the aisle. And so I'm proud to say that a lot of the bills that I introduce are bills that don't have an R or D next to them. It's just a us. It's a humanity. And so the two bills that I'll leave with is January 11th, that's Human Trafficking Awareness Month. There's been, from Senator Teresa Fetter to so many others who came before me who wanted to uplift this. We never got it over the finish line, we were able to do it last GA to assure that Ohio has a date and a month that we recognize Human Trafficking Awareness Day, right? That we build up on the prevention supports, on the treatment supports, on the pathways to getting individuals out of the trafficking space and into a space where they are truly themselves and they're on their journey of healing. And then lastly, I'm a lead poison survivor. Almost died from it. And so lead poisoning is a big thing for me. I was working alongside Representative Tom Patton, and we were able to get $150 million allocated through House Bill 45 to do lead prevention and remediation. Because even in communities like Bexley, right, there are still pipes and houses that are filled with lead, especially if you have an older home. And for families who may not have the means, that remediation can cost upwards of $5,000 plus. And so what are we doing as a state to ensure that those individuals are getting support that they need? We were able to bring $150 million from ARPA to actually begin to address lead in our state. And so those are just a snapshot of the bills that we were able to introduce. And then trust and believe there's a lot more bills that we want to introduce that we're fighting to make sure it gets across the finish line. So these are the bills that I currently have in place now, 6 bills. First one is the same bill I introduced last GA, which was increasing the minimum wage. We know in my family, I literally think back to when my mom worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. I know that my mom's story is not an isolated story, and that there are so many families who are trying to make ends meet and are struggling simply because they're not bringing in enough money. And so we want to raise the minimum wage, but also we want to change the benefit cliff. Now, if you don't know what the benefit cliff is, it is when you are on assistance. Let's say you have a Medicaid voucher, or let's say you are getting some energy assistance for your gas or electric, and you hit an income threshold where you hit the top of the income eligibility. What happens typically is in those programs, you're immediately cut off. There's no path to or glide down to you not receiving that support. And so there are families, when they make 70 cents over the eligibility threshold, they end up they're losing $400, $500 worth of benefit. And so one of the bills that we're currently debating to get back into the budget, it was in the budget, then the Senate took it out the budget, it's called a helping hand. It's House Bill 410. And it was a bipartisan bill where we actually began to change how we looked at benefit cliffs in the state of Ohio. And so it's not just about raising income, it's also changing how we look at eligibility for these social supports when people need them. The other piece is, we were going to actually pass it out today. We got it informally passed, but the Pay Stub Protection Act. I don't know if you knew this or not, but in Ohio, there is no law that says you could get a pay stub when you work. No law. And so when you think about wage theft, oftentimes wage theft occurs when an individual does not see or have their pay stubs. And so it was a bill myself and Representative Bridget Kelly she was working on this last GA and it didn't make it. It passed the House unanimously, did not get through the process in the Senate, and it died last GA. Well, this GA, myself and Representative Scott Lips have reintroduced that bill, and it passed unanimously out of committee. It was going to pass off the floor, probably unanimously. Come on, with best wishes, and and go over to the Senate much earlier so we can actually get it done. So that each and every one of us, if you work a job, you should get a pay stub. It's just that simple. Establish a Foster College Scholarship Act. Currently in law in Ohio, we have no scholarship for foster children. And when you think about the number of young people who navigate the trauma of just traumas of life, and the fact that they don't necessarily get any support when they are transitioning from that foster home to a collegiate environment, what happens to them? Oftentimes, they end up not making it. Oftentimes, they end up falling through the cracks. Oftentimes, they come home and they don't know where to go and they don't know where to stay. And so the Foster College Scholarship Act is a bill that was in the budget as well and got taken out. It was a bill with Representative Sykes and I to ensure that we are providing tuition supports to foster youth over the age of 13. because we've got to make sure that we're providing that helping hand to some of our most vulnerable youth. And then the last three are fairly quick. House Joint Resolution 2. We talked about House Joint Resolution 1, which is issue 1. House Joint Resolution 2 is my bill with Representative Plummer that's going to remove slavery once and for all out of our Ohio Constitution. Currently in place, we have a verbiage that says there should be no slavery nor involuntary servitude unless for the punishment of a crime. And it's those 6 words that still keeps Ohio in a place where we uplift slavery in a different name. And one of the things that, if you think about what happened after we emancipated, there's these things called the Black Codes that were taken into place. And the Black Codes ultimately enslaved individuals using this language. And so one of the things we want to do is, through HJR2, is to remove slavery once and for all. We're one of the last states in the country that has slavery still in our Constitution. And so if we are moving away from a very unfortunate sin of our past, we have to make sure our language and how we speak and what we write and what it shows in our Constitution shows that too. And then lastly, lead lines. Ohio has some of the most lead lines in the country, in the state, and it's incredibly important that we do everything we can to provide support to families when, on the municipal side, we're changing lead lines, but on the side where the owner has the responsibility, when they can't pay, that family is still in a predicament where their children can have lead and lead poisoning. And so for me, it's about changing all of our water lines to remove lead once and for all. And then lastly, designate Counseling Awareness Month, because it's just simply the right thing to do. And so those are my bills. I will, in lieu of time, it's 7:30. I want to kind of move over to, here's just some constituent services. We've engaged over 1,000 individuals, and we broke it down by different layers. So 116 people we dealt with to help with unemployment. 23 individuals we did federal referrals, because some of the issues that we see in the state we can't change the environment. We can't change their outcome. We have to go, it's above me, as they say, right? And so we referred individuals to Congresswoman Joyce Beatty's office, 54 individuals for food stamps, 714 for advocacy, and those are individuals who call us to advocate on legislation or ask us questions related to, so what are your thoughts on this issue or that issue? A lot of the times after we do these types of conversations, a lot of individuals call our office to ask more questions and figure out how do they get engaged on some of the issues that are happening in the State House. And then lastly, we had 108 unique cases. So everything from taxes to Medicaid to housing, we kind of, each of those instances was a unique case that required a unique solution. And that's kind of the beauty of the work. It's not everything is going to be robotic, right? Some of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are things that is just a solution for you and your situation. And so when we say we're doing miracles every day, a lot of those families were able to get what they needed because they contacted our offices. So now let's chit-chat. Let's talk about the budget. And I'll put this up so that you all know. Senator, you want to come on up? I'll put this up so that you all know. Right now, we're going through our 2-year budget. It's now in conference committee, so it started in the House with the governor's as introduced budget. We vetted it. We sent it over to the Senate. The Senate vetted it and then sent it back to us, and we was like, no. We do not confer. And now we're in a conference committee, which means that we are negotiating based upon the differing priorities between the House and the Senate to actually hopefully get to a unified budget that we all agree on. And so just to talk a little bit about the money, we have $162 billion in all funds budget, which basically includes federal funds. We have $74 billion. It's actually tipped, it went up because I actually got a new round of revenue estimates. And so that $74 billion is a little bit higher now. But essentially, that's the general revenue fund where we as the House and the Senate have discretion in terms of where that money goes. And then $50.2 billion in state taxpayer dollars, including the alone in the GRF, which is not including the federal Medicaid dollars. And so while this is not all the money, because we also have to include ARPA dollars in this, which was unspent dollars that we still have to allocate. This is I think, a pretty good estimation of where we are in terms of the money that we're negotiating through our conference committee. There you go.
Well, we've got, this time we want to set aside for you. I was committed absolutely to make sure that you had time to ask questions. In some of the bills, we've got range of bills that we can talk about that we've introduced, and you can get those. My office, certainly we will share that with you. I need to make sure that my staff is here tonight, that I recognize them. Lucy, if you'll stand and wave, and Max, if you'll also just kind of stand and wave. I will miss her greatly. She is also a fellow. She is brilliant. We will miss you so much, Kaylee, and all of the work that she's doing. But all of us, in terms of the work and the legislation, I've introduced a minimum wage bill since I've been in the legislature. That's not new. So you can find all of that information by calling our office, and all of the legislation that we both introduced, the ones that we're currently working on, the kind of work that we're doing to help people in every facet of their lives. I think the representative is absolutely correct. When people call, they're at their lowest when they call our office. And so to get them to the resources that will help them is being so vitally important, and that's a lot of people don't see with legislatures and the work that most folk don't know what we do. People ask me, when are you in Washington? I go to Washington, but our work is right here with you. Yep. I have about close to 400,000 people that I represent in my Senate district. This is one of them in this House seat. There are 2 other House seats that I have the privilege of serving. So I'm going to stop there. This budget, we can show you the numbers. The real importance is what we're going to do, what's important to you. That's the issue. And how we serve families and children. That's where the rub is in terms of not just it's coming from the House and the Senate does not agree. There are 7 members in my caucus. The House had a little bit more of the benefit. It's still, the caucus in the House is still, in the other party has deference. They have more numbers. But the 7 of us in the Senate are absolutely, I can guarantee you, working for you every single day. And so, but that struggle is a real one. When that budget came over from the House, there are things that certainly I supported from the House. There were issues with the governor, and we've not always agreed. But some of the issues around child care, I served on the publicly funded child care committee for over a year. And I would have liked to see that get to well over 200% and kind of what we can do for families and children. They only moved that dot a few numbers, a few percentages. So the child care issues, the issues that we raise with regard to food and nutrition are deeply troubling. Families that have never had to go and get food from food centers are now having to do that. Yep. And they're kind of atypical. Yep. It's not just the folks you might think or somebody might want you to think that are having to go to get food at food centers. These are working people that are having to go get nutrition for their families. And so that's an issue that we raised on the Senate floor. So it's nutrition, it's the issue with child care, and children are vitally important. the working poor, and middle income families that are struggling. So this budget issue, it's not new. But I think because of the vitriol that right now that exists in the budget in the Senate, they put some of the vitriolic language in there, some of the bills that's deeply troubling in the budget. And so it's not something that I'm going to look at supporting until we're able to take some of that language out. He's absolutely correct. It has gone to the conference committee because it's a bicameral system. You have to have agreement on both sides of that issue. But your support right now is so vital. It's not just the legislators, it's the voters, and holding us accountable to the work that we need to be doing. So let me stop here and see if there are questions about specifically regarding the budget or any other issues you might want to ask.
You know, so many times I get these emails, call your representative, but I know how my representatives are voting. They're voting like you're voting. So what else could we do on the budget to move that?
Well, what I would encourage is calling every member of the legislature, so not both D's and R's, because in great numbers when we're having testimony on these bills, your support is invaluable to help, you know, and again, the votes that I take, and we may not win, but the public knows very clearly where we stand on these issues. We've seen ebbs and tides in the legislature. Just a few years ago, Governor Strickland was the governor. Governor Celeste has been the governor. I've seen a lot of things over time in the legislature. So I will never be not hopeful. Now, we're in a very difficult period, but I think because of this whole issue with redistricting and that issue, and we need to continue to fight to make sure that we have fair districts, that is absolutely essential. Win or lose, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you need to have a fair district and then run on your merit. At council, I had to run citywide. And so I'm used to that process. I welcome it. And so it ought to be a fair process where that you win on ideas, you win for the people that put you there have the kind of input about the issues that are important to you. Right now, that does not exist in the state of Ohio. And
Senator,
that's not okay.
Senator, if I can add, what's your name? Vicki. So Vicki, you know, one of the things that I will tell you to piggyback on what the senator said, it is calling your legislators, right? It's writing your legislators. Some of you may have already done that, and I appreciate you and applaud you for if you have. Also, is testifying. You know, we both sit on Finance Committee. I was the ranking member of our Higher Education Subcommittee for Finance for the House, and the governor introduced some of the most, I won't say progressive because it's still a Republican budget, but it was some of the most forward-thinking investments in higher education we've seen in a very long time. Investments on technical schools, investments to help with trades, investments to help with individuals who are just returning. They're trying to get a work certificate so that they get their certificate can help them get another $15,000, right? And unfortunately, when the budget went over to the Senate, they stripped every single one of those provisions out. And so if you are dedicated and connected to higher ed, then you would talk with members of the Senate and the House to talk about the importance of higher education. Another thing that we were able to do, we allocated money to organizations like Star House, $1.25 million to address some real needs of vulnerable young people in this community. When they went over to the Senate, they took it out. Now, not Senator Craig, he agreed with it, but the Senate took it out.
I don't want you guys mad at me.
And so, you know, there are individuals who are advocates for youth homelessness who are asking young people and individuals who are supporters and advocates to share their story as to why it's important for that money to come back. Because if I always ask the question in testimony, what's the cost of doing nothing? Right? The cost of doing nothing when we don't invest in child homelessness means that we're going to see more homelessness. The cost of doing nothing when it comes to supporting young people who need that free lunch, free breakfast at school, which, by the way, only costs about $28 million to feed every single child in this state. And yet, when we pushed for it in the House, we didn't get it. So the cost of doing nothing is the question that should be on every single one of our minds. And so when you're advocating for yourself or for other folks, tell the story. Tell the story of what it would mean if we don't invest in young people, if we don't invest in higher education, if we don't invest in food security for families that look like yours and mine. That's what we need more of, because those stories change mindsets and perspectives in those rooms that we're in.
Yes.
The budget. Hello, hi. The budget they mentioned would have, well, actually, the state income tax really is the critical thing, where there would be only 3 different levels of state income tax. And that, to me, is not a way of having a progressive income tax. It's just the next step would be no state tax, which would be a disaster. So I think the problem that everyone should see is that that money solves a lot of these health, safety, welfare questions, and taking it away puts everything in the possession of private enterprise, which I don't know, it's not been solving a lot of problems. But I think the interest in things that private enterprise doesn't want to invest in should be the responsibility of the state.
Well, and here's the thing also with that, and I appreciate so much you raising that issue, because on surface it looks good. But that narrow top group benefits enormously on that issue of taxing. The folks right in the middle are paying enormously for that tax burden. But the thing that you really raised, because, and I believe someone talked about issues around education. How do we fund our schools? How do we fund our police and fire? All of those things that we think about that happens, that is so critical to our daily lives, is so vital. Listen, my children are adults, twice his age almost. And look, but they're adults. But every school levy I see, I'm going to support, because I want our children to have the resources that they need. And I won't argue or debate that point with you, but we want to make certain that all of those, that's how we pay for it. When I was on council, 70% of that budget was police and fire. Now, we can argue those points. But when we talk about that whole issue around taxing and the implications for that, and those two narrow, it's deceptive, because that top group pays very little taxes in terms of what the middle income folks have the most burden of paying the taxes for this nation. And so we struggle with that issue of taxing. Whenever I see that, the question must always be, is it fair? Is it equitable?
Yep.
Does it meet the needs of our families and our children, all of them, no matter what their zip code is? And we must all ask that question. This whole issue about housing that we're struggling with right now, if we don't solve that issue of housing, now, we have Intel and these corporations coming. I want every young person, no matter where they are or whomever you are, to be able to get those jobs. But if we don't have the kinds of housing that are sustainable, it's not just affordable housing, it's housing that is affordable for all of our families. So we're struggling with that issue to make sure in the legislature that we have the kinds of public policy where people can transition into housing. And that's a real issue for the state of Ohio and every community that I talk with in the state. So I think you raise a very valid question. I think the taxation issue, the housing issue, the issue around our children and families, economic development, workforce, health care is vital, and those are the kinds of things we're going to be struggling with and talking with as we move in this issue around this budget. My hope is we can get the budget done by statute by Friday, by the 1st. But everybody's looking like we're not going to happen, and we probably won't, but we're going to fight.
Yeah, we are.
Because for your sake, that this drags on, it has implications for all of us. And some people wanted us to let it drag on.
Yep.
That is not my position.
And Senator, if I could add, and I see your hand, so I'm gonna go right to you. Some of my Republican colleagues want us to look like Florida. And I don't know about you, but we don't got a lot of beaches and a lot of sunlight all the time, right? And I remember we were in constitutional resolutions, we were talking about this issue of taxation. And this whole, there's a focal point of getting us to a point where we don't have any sales tax in the state. And when we were talking about deliberating on a budget, the budget was, at the time, the tax cut was like $1.1 billion. It went over to the Senate and it went up to like, what, $3.8, $3.7 billion. So when you think about how much money, you know what we can fund with $3.7 billion, right? And so the impact that we are faced with when it comes to that high of a tax cut on services across our state is just unsustainable. And I always ask the question, where else were we going to get the money from? Where else are we going to get the money from? I would love to know. I wish we did. I wish we were like Florida in terms of people moving here. We have.
We've got high tax rates on a lot of things, sales tax.
Yep.
So we can't max out those anymore. So if you start cutting them, you're going to have to cut services.
Yes, that is essentially what's.
Mental health.
Yep.
People that are disabled.
Yep.
These are people that shouldn't suffer.
Absolutely. So to your point, in fact, on the Senate version of the budget, we sent over to the House additional funds for organizations like the Adam H. boards of Franklin County and all the other Adam boards, right? And unfortunately, in the Senate side, they took $10 million to fund this tax cut out of the behavioral health continuum line item. And so when we think about the cost of this is real for people. And that $10 million could very well be the difference between a group of people getting into treatment and living their best life or dying. And so these decisions, as I said in the beginning, are life and death decisions that we take seriously in our work, but we all, as a community, need to speak up and speak out. So I see your hand.
I'm too shy, so I don't want the mic.
Okay.
It's okay.
Go ahead, ma'am, please.
But I'll talk louder. So, when you mentioned Florida, the echoes of what they're trying to do in Ohio, I find it kind of disturbing and eerie. And Senator, when you used the adjective draconian, and I immediately think about other things that we're putting in the budget.
Yes.
For instance, in terms of higher education.
SB 83.
And I wonder how it sounds like you're trying to fight that as well. And, we talk about, like squelching that you can't teach diversity.
Yes.
Equity, inclusion.
Inclusiveness. I find it very disturbing. And, and also just, many of us are from minorities.
Right.
Yes.
Obviously. So that seems to be a very ugly side.
Yes.
And I appreciate so much you raising that issue. And that's one of those bills that's been attached to the budget bill. And it's deeply disturbing. But, because power sometimes, in some cases, corrupts absolutely. Just because you can. And that issue is deeply troubling. on many perspectives. Because, you know, we've had testimony from college professors, from other folks that have come in and talked about that issue, because it has very serious implications and long-term implications.
Absolutely.
And so we have to really look at that issue, fight it up front, because that's just one of the bills that's been attached. And so sometimes people say, well, it may not affect me, but it affects all of us. It affects all of us. And so, but I appreciate you raising that, because as we, you know, there are about 4 or 5 bills that have been put in the budget bill just like that. And when I say draconian, I say that mildly. I want to say something else. But it's so troubling that there's no way, even if I've got a bill in there in the budget that I believe in, that's helpful, but I cannot support that budget bill as long as that legislation is in that bill, because I know of the implications and what it will do for families and children. Now, again, but the point that you've raised, and I think we've all raised, and the reason we're here tonight, and you raised such a good question, what can I do? We all can do something. Because in a democracy, the most important person is not the legislator. It's the voter. It's the voter. And please tell your friends, tell your families, take 5 people with you to the polls, because the other thing that we have is this big elephant in the room that we've talked about is issue 1. Well, that's the demarcation that will change the whole dynamic in how we vote, where it should be 50 plus 1. That changes that whole thing. Now, that whole issue, and we can all do something. And I feel I've never been more hopeful in my life. At the same time, I understand that the struggle that we face is so real. But you know, Dr. King talked about this thing, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But it does not bend by itself. And like my mother came here very poor. And the reason I'm standing here today is because of my mother and many like her that really would go door to door for cancer and other kinds of things. She volunteered in her church. She insisted that her children would be responsible and contribute. But not only her, many of those folks, and many of which did not have formal educations, deposited so much in my life. My teacher, my 12th grade teacher, Mrs. Ward, fought for me. And so that's the reason I have hope. We talked about those 385 days that those folks walked in Montgomery, Alabama, and for civil rights. They would not even take a car or a bus. And so the question always comes to me is, what kind of responsibility do I have? So we all can do something. I think tonight, hearing from you is so helpful for me. It energizes me. You know, I think the representative who's doing a great job in what he's doing, his passion, his leadership. But we can't do our work without you. We just simply can't. We can't do our work in a silo or a vacuum, because it does not belong to us. These are not our positions. We don't own these. The public owns these positions. And so by you being here tonight, holding us accountable, we may not always agree, but I can guarantee you I'm at my office early in the morning. That is my wife, and she's at her office at 6 o'clock in the morning every morning and telling me what to do. But this is an important event for us to be with you. Any other questions before we close?
Well, Senator, let me say a couple of things. And I know we only got 4 minutes, and so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. One, vote hell no on issue 1, right? It's absolutely imperative. I say get your grandbabies, your uncle, your auntie, your sister, your brother, everybody you know to vote no on issue 1. And let me say this too. You know, we allocated $15 million, not enough money, by the way, to fund the August 8th elections. And right now, if you've been reading in Gongwer or Dispatch, they're having trouble finding poll workers. Do you know what happens? Most of you do. You know what happens when you can't find poll workers? They consolidate polling locations. And it's the same of what happened last year when myself and Senator Craig ran for office in an August special election. We had, 6% turnout. 6% turnout across the state of Ohio. And so the reality is they're banking on the dysfunction, the confusion, so that folks just say, you know what, I'm not voting. And issue 1 wins. And so the imperative that we're in right now is to ask everybody you know to vote on issue 1. The second thing I want to leave you with is we talked about SB 83, which is the higher education bill that got put into the budget. Also, you had Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 1 is the bill that changes all of the school board and the state school board and makes it basically the governor can appoint a education czar. Now, when we talk about what does that mean to the quality of education when we can't even pass a social studies curriculum that is diverse across cultural perspectives, but yet the House is currently debating it, a social studies curriculum that has been pushed by and sponsored by some of our Republican colleagues, right? We're at a really critical point in our history where there are, unfortunately, a group of individuals who want to roll back how our education looks. When we're banning diversity and inclusion efforts at higher education, when we're saying we're banning books, when Amanda Gorman's book can't even fit on the shelf in Florida, I'm afraid of the day where that happens here in Ohio. And so the work that we are doing in the State House is so incredibly important, and issue 1 is absolutely attached to that. But this is a 365, every single day, pound on the ground process, because we're in the fight of our lives. And I hate to say it like that, right? I want it to be hopeful, but we're in a fight for our lives, because what our young people inherit should be a better society than the one that we have today. And unfortunately, that just simply may not be the case.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for the privilege of being with you tonight. Appreciate you.
That's a perfect landing. I landed that plane 8 o'clock. What'd you say? Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Thank you for everything.